Hi, this is Russ Andersson. Today I'm going to talk about how your windows and settings get saved as you close and reopen files. Now, the general idea is that if you close a file, reopen it, you have the same thing. So let's just run through that as a simple example. We'll just start making some adjustments to this. I'm going to open up a solver locking panel. We'll put that up here. So this is just going to be an example of, one of the kinds of Windows arrangements that you might use as you're working on some particular type of task. And it's a custom layout that includes not only the normal viewports, but also can include dialogues as well. And these dialogues don't go into the normal scheme of viewport arrangement that you get from the viewport manager. So I've got a setup like this. Maybe we'll go and zoom in on something in the camera view also. We're looking at some part of the 3D environment. And now we can go and save this configuration away. And I'll close SynthEyes. And I'm going to go down and just double click an icon for that particular file so that it's going to come and open back up. And you see everything reappears in that same arrangement. We've got our same viewport positions and pan and zoom as well. And that continues to happen if I go and open up a different file and go back to one. So you can see that Windows can really come and go as you're opening and closing files. Now the windows that are affected by this include, not just the ones that you've seen here. You've got the different viewports that are the perspective view, floating perspective view, floating camera view, floating hierarchy, floating simultrack, but also the main modal or modeless dialogues, such as the solver locking, the stereo locking, the texture panel. So you can see there are a whole bunch of different things, and basically all of these are going to be saved and restored back to their same positions. I'll point out SynthEyes is also included in this scheme, but it's a little bit different just because it does take some time to close or reopen it, to start it up and to close it. So instead of doing that, if SynthEyes is open and doesn't need to be, it'll be minimized instead. So instead of opening and closing, it just minimizes or not. So this scheme also includes the control panels. If you're using a more, Photoshop-y sort of setup, if you like, where you have multiple different panels brought up, these are also under the control of this subsystem. So I can save them away, and we'll just switch back to the other file, and then you can get back, and you got everything back there again. So let's just go back to the no floating version. Now these window placements are also maintained if you've got multiple monitors. So you might have some of the windows on a separate monitor. Obviously I can't show that here, but of course, as you close and reopen the file, those windows will be put back onto the same monitor. Now the situation's a little more complicated if you've got a file that's coming from somebody with a different machine setup, different number of monitors, different resolutions, or even if it's your same machine, but you've disconnected one of the monitors, maybe you've got a laptop that's docked or not, something like that. So SynthEyes does work to adjust the placement to compensate for that difference, so that windows that are on a secondary monitor will be replaced in the right spots, even if the monitor is switched from the left to left or right of the main monitor, for example, or they get rescaled to match a change in resolution, or even moved back to the main monitor if there isn't a secondary monitor anymore. But overall, this isn't an exact science, because the dialogues, like this solver locking one up here, can't be resized. They're always a fixed size. So you may have to go and adjust your placement a little bit if you're reading a file from somebody with a different monitor setup. Now, the same subsystem that stores your window locations also stores settings information from throughout SynthEyes. So first I want to talk about the difference between settings and other kinds of information in the scene. The key point is if I go and select some stuff, then it's created an undo record. That is an example of something that's stored in the scene file and is an actual change, undoable change to the scene. So I can undo that, redo that. The settings information that I'm talking about typically involves how the scene is presented to you, what the appearance of the trackers is, what playback speed you're using. Those are things that aren't creating undo records, and you don't want to have creating undo records. They're useful information. They're stuff that you're keeping track of as you're working in SynthEyes, but they're not part of the scene itself, but they're still good to have when you close and reopen the file. I'll point out there's a third kind of information as well, which are preferences. And of course, you've seen out in SynthEyes, you've got this whole collection of preferences. The key thing about preferences is that they primarily control what happens when something new is created, whether it's a new tracker or a new window, and you need to have some initial settings for it. The preferences are the go-to place to decide how to configure that new object. So those preferences aren't stored in the scene file. They're not really part of the scene file. They don't create undo records, nor are they saved as settings across from one run to another. Some of them just control what happens when new things are created, and some of them do control things that are particular to your machine, like how much RAM cache you want to use in your particular machine. So they're not in the scene file. So that's three different kinds of information to think about that can control what's happening: the preferences, the settings, and the scene itself. So here are some of the different kinds of information that are saved as settings. First off, there are the camera and perspective views, actual pan and zoom settings in the perspective view. There's also, what direction the camera is looking in the 3D environment, what its field of view is. You've got the different menus, and obviously there are a lot of things that are checked or not checked all throughout here. Now, some of those are actually scene settings, things that are in the scene, what the different resampling modes are that are actually also controlled from the image preprocessor. And you can see, if you need to check on something, you can see by whether or not it creates an undo record or not. It also includes things like the graph editor, what's happening out here, what the gains are of the different channels are, where the zeros are, where the offsets are for them. So that information is preserved as well as what's open and what's not. So if we go and just save this, and I'll switch over to the empty, and now we switch back, and we wind up with the same setup, which is what we're trying to get to. There are additional settings for, again, the major dialogues like add many and clean up trackers and coalesce trackers, so that those are automatically restored to your values that you use initially, perhaps. It also stores all the settings and positions for the scripts that you run. So that might be your importers, your exporters, and your tools. So you can get back those same settings, reuse them, modify them as you need to. Again, there's the script bars, so their positions are all maintained if you've got some script bars open. You've got as well the perspective view, where its different menus are, and its toolbars are and what toolbars are open. So that information's all saved. The constrained points view, what the width of the columns is. There's save sequence here, the settings from that. Similar sort of settings for when you go and make a preview movie. That information is saved away as well as the compression settings for the different formats. So, as you can see, it's really a whole grab bag of all kinds of different stuff that I've tracked down. If I missed something in this process, let me know, but I think the coverage is really pretty good. Now we get to some of the warnings and the caveats here. If I take a file like this and now I've saved it away, and now I just go and I start making some changes here. These are changes to the settings, but they're not changes to the scene. So if I go and exit at this point, it's not going to trigger the dialog that's going to ask you whether you want to save the scene file or not. It's just going to save immediately. And those last couple of changes that you made that affected the user interface but not the scene will get lost in the process. If you actually want to save those last little changes, you just need to be sure to go and hit the save button directly. Now there is a kind of more serious hazard as well. If you're opening a SynthEyes file from somebody else's machine, it may have settings in it that you made once upon a time and now you've forgotten them. Or if it's a scene file from somebody else even, it may be a setting you don't even know about. Or settings from that file may override some of the preferences that you have. So that's a bit of a hazard that you need to watch out for when you're using the settings file. But we do allow a way to control that, and that is through the preferences. So you can open up the preferences. We'll go to the file open area, and you see that there are a bunch of additional controls. So the first control is this load only placements. So that's kind of a quick go-to if you've got a file from somebody and you don't know what it's doing and what settings it may be making. You can just click that, just temporarily when you load the file, and you'll see only the effect of some of their placements, but not any changes to the overall SynthEyes settings that it might be making. For some more fine-grained control, though, you have this drop-down, which gives you a bunch of different options. The default is to always load, and that means to load all the window placements as well as all of the settings. But you can also say, well, hey, I want to only load that information if the file was written originally on my own machine. If it comes from somebody else, then it'll automatically be stripped out. When you reopen your own files, then you'll get your own particular configuration the way that you like. And you also have the option to just say, I don't want to bother with any of this stuff. I don't want any of my windows to do anything to get back to where they were before, or any of the settings to change. Just go back to actually what SynthEyes was doing before 1608, which is never load any of this kind of information. You see there's another option here as well, which has to do with these preferences settings. So you have the option to go and save the current configuration of the settings and the window placements basically as preferences, so that when you create a new SynthEyes file, this current layout and settings will be used when you create that new file. That's the set scene as preferences. That would include the placement as well as the settings. You also have the option to store just the placements as preferences. So that would mean that when you created a new file, you would get this particular placement as a starting point. You also then have the option to get rid of that information if you want. This is kind of like having a template file if you like, that you can just simply save any file away and then just open that file and then add a shot to it. this particular scheme lets you do it, but you can then still do file new the same way. You don't have to add a shot and then remove the old one, for example. Again, this can be a bit dangerous because you can have information in these preferences, your saved placements and settings, that you don't know what is. So it's a little bit more a hazard. I do urge a little bit of caution to that. The placements as preferences option is a reasonable one that avoids the settings issue while still letting you get the placements if you're so inclined. I urge you to check the manual for some more of the details. You see there's set scene to preferences also, which goes in the reverse direction, which lets you reset the current scene to whatever you've got stored away. There's a bunch more fine details like that you can take a look at and check out. So thanks for watching.